He was the largest single-engine aircraft on an aircraft carrier's deck, but pilots called him a nightmare and mechanics a headache. He was created as a weapon of the future, but he remained a transitional link, stuck between ambitious dreams and harsh reality. He opened new horizons in anti-submarine warfare, but at the same time broke the fates of crews and caused disasters that people tried not to talk about aloud. Why did the fleet risk betting on a machine that many pilots hated? How did engineering breakthroughs coexist with miscalculations that turned every flight into a survival test? And why today is the Guardian remembered not only as a symbol of progress, but also as one of the most controversial decisions in the history of American aviation? The answers are hidden in history, where successes and failures go hand in hand, where heroism coexists with tragedies, and brilliant ideas turn into difficult compromises. Stay until the end. What follows is something rarely written about in textbooks. Over the calm waters of Chesapeake Bay in the early 1920s, the first naval aircraft took to the air. It seemed like ordinary training flights, but behind them lay an idea that could change the course of future wars. Lieutenant Chester William Nimitz, long before his name would become a symbol of the American fleet, observed the experiments. Could an aircraft be used to search for a submarine hidden beneath the water's surface? At that time, it sounded almost like science fiction. A submarine was an invisible enemy hidden in the depths, while an aircraft was a vulnerable machine that could only fly over the surface. But the thought that air could help control the sea seemed too tempting to dismiss. These first attempts did not yield immediate results, but they left a mark. In the U.S. Navy staffs, people began to think that the future of anti-submarine warfare was impossible without aviation. Before World War II, the primary weapons against submarines were either multi-engine land-based aircraft capable of long ocean patrols or seaplanes that took off directly from the water. Carrier-based aviation seemed superfluous in this role. Why overload aircraft carriers with heavy machines if a shore-based squadron could always be deployed? Moreover, ships already had their own guns and depth charges. In the eyes of many admirals, the idea of a specialized anti-submarine aircraft seemed an unjustified waste of resources and effort. But the war in the Atlantic quickly changed these perceptions. German submarines were turning the ocean into hunting grounds, and it seemed that no convoy could feel safe. It was then that it became clear that to stop the wolf packs, not only the sea but also the sky was needed. The Atlantic of World War II became an arena of covert confrontation, where the fate of millions of tons of cargo depended on the hunt for invisible enemies. German submarines operated in groups, attacking merchant ships under the cover of night and disappearing into the depths before the escort could react. Every convoy lived in tension, as a single mistake could cost dozens of lives and strategically important supplies. The turning point came when escort carriers entered the scene. These ships were smaller than their heavily armed counterparts, but they gave convoys eyes and protection from the air. Now, aircraft patrolled the sea, capable of spotting a submarine's wake before it could take up an attack position. Among them, the Grumman Avenger stood out. It was a machine designed as a torpedo bomber, but proved itself in a completely new role. The Avenger was heavy, durable, and reliable. Its bomb bays could carry depth charges, rockets, and torpedoes, and its radar allowed it to detect the enemy in conditions where the human eye was powerless. With each month of the war, such aircraft became increasingly dangerous for submarines. Now, it was the German crews who had to stay underwater longer, losing freedom of maneuver and effectiveness. By the end of the war, U.S. Navy staffs understood that a new era would require special aircraft, capable not just of dropping torpedoes, but of conducting long hunts for hidden enemies. The first response to this challenge was Project XTB-2F. On paper, it looked impressive. A twin-engine aircraft capable of carrying over 15 tons of armament and covering a distance of over 6,000 kilometers. Such an aircraft seemed like an ideal hunter, capable of controlling vast ocean expanses. But the further the project progressed, the more obvious it became. It was too large for reality. Taking off from an SX-class aircraft carrier was a real challenge for such a behemoth, and accommodating such a heavy aircraft on a ship threatened logistical nightmares. The Navy decided to abandon this ambitious but unfeasible project. An attempt to find a compromise led to another solution, adapting the existing Tiger Cat fighter for the role of a torpedo bomber. At first glance, this seemed logical. The machine already existed, had been tested in combat, and possessed high speed. But as soon as engineers delved deeper into the task, it became clear that the conversion would require too many significant changes. There wasn't enough space for full armament. The structural balance was disrupted, and the requirements for range and payload were still not met. After failures with previous projects, Grumman engineers decided to take a risk and proposed a concept that seemed revolutionary at the time. The new aircraft, designated Grumman Model G70, was to combine two types of power plants, a proven piston engine in the nose and a small turbojet engine in the tail. Thus, the XTB-TF-1 was born, becoming a symbol of the bold search for balance between the past and the future. The idea was appealing. The powerful Pratt & Whitney double wasp radial engine provided reliability and range. The Westinghouse jet engine was supposed to provide an additional boost in combat, allowing the aircraft to accelerate sharply during an attack. Designers hoped that such a hybrid would combine all the advantages: payload, speed, and versatility. But in practice, the scheme turned out to be full of contradictions. The jet engine proved unreliable and capricious. Moreover, its production lagged behind schedule. An attempt to replace it with a less powerful unit only worsened the situation. The aircraft became heavier, but its speed hardly increased. At the same time, installing a jet engine in the tail required complex solutions for the fuel system, cooling, and fuselage layout. Test flights showed that the machine was generally capable of flying and performing its tasks, but the benefit from the jet engine did not justify its problems. Ultimately, the turbojet part was simply removed, leaving only the piston engine. The aircraft did not become the technological breakthrough that was hoped for, but it was these experiments that showed designers and the fleet that the future path lay not in hybrid schemes, but in creating a specialized platform ready for a new role. On December 23, 1946, the first XTB-3F1 took to the sky. The machine, conceived as a torpedo bomber, underwent its baptism of air, but its future turned out to be quite different from what the engineers had envisioned a few years earlier. The world had changed, the war had ended, and with its end, the very concept of a frontline torpedo bomber had become a thing of the past. Military priorities shifted. Where the enemy's battleship was once considered the main threat, now all attention focused on submarines. They became the main challenge for the fleet in the Cold Peace era, when new political realities demanded different means of deterrence. The U.S. Navy realized that aircraft carriers needed to be armed, not just with attack aircraft, but with aircraft capable of conducting systematic underwater hunts. When the Navy considered converting the XTB-3F1 into an anti-submarine aircraft, it quickly became clear. It was impossible to fit both armament and bulky search equipment into a single machine. Radar, electronic intelligence equipment, magnetic detectors, and workstations for additional operators occupied so much space that there was simply no room left for bombs and torpedoes. But abandoning the armed version was also out of the question. Without striking the detected submarine, reconnaissance lost its meaning. Thus, the hunter-killer concept was born. Instead of one universal aircraft, engineers created two. The first was nicknamed Guppy. It was an eyed machine with a huge APS-20 radar fairing under the fuselage. Its crew included additional specialists who were responsible for searching for and tracking targets. However, the Guppy had no armament at all. Its strength lay in its ability to find the enemy where it believed itself to be invisible. The second version, known as Scrapper, on the other hand, retained its weapon bay. It carried depth charges, rockets, and torpedoes, and had a searchlight on its wings for night operations. Its task was to attack the submarine that the Guppy had located. Thus, they operated as a pair. One tracked the target, the other delivered the strike. Test flights of the new versions became a true laboratory of the future. The aircraft with the XTB-3F1 index, the eyed version, first took to the air at the end of 1948. A huge radome for the S-20 radar hung beneath the fuselage, which looked unusual but opened up entirely new possibilities. The cockpit accommodated not only the pilot and a second crew member, but also additional specialists engaged in decoding signals and monitoring screens. This aircraft had no weapons, but it was packed with electronics that seemed almost fantastic for its time. A little later, the XTB-3F2 Scrapper went for testing. Its design included a spotlight for night search, a short-range radar, and the retained bay for depth charges and torpedoes. The cockpit housed a third crew member responsible for operating the equipment and preparing for the attack. For the first time in the American fleet, full-fledged electronic warfare systems appeared. Receivers detected enemy radar emissions and helped determine their direction. Soon, the first magnetic anomaly detectors were added to this set, capable of detecting distortions in the Earth's magnetic field caused by a submarine's movement. In the fall of 1950, the first production Guardians were delivered to combat units. Squadron VS-24 received several aircraft to refine tactics, and soon, VS-25 joined it. Pilots and technical staff encountered a completely new experience. Instead of familiar universal torpedo bombers, they had to work with a pair of aircraft, each performing only one task: search or attack. Grumman's production lines worked non-stop. Over several years, nearly 400 aircraft of various modifications were built. The aircraft received the official designation AF Guardian, and this name stuck with it not only in documents but also in sailors' conversations. It became the largest single-engine carrier-based aircraft ever built. Its massive fuselage, huge wings, and imposing weight made it a giant among its peers. Each new squadron that received the Guardian mastered a new doctrine of anti-submarine hunting. The Guppy took to the air first, scanning the surface and depths with its radar, while the Scrapper waited for the signal to strike. This scheme seemed cumbersome, but it was precisely this approach that allowed the fleet to establish systematic defense against the hidden enemy for the first time. When the Korean War began, the Guardian was among the aircraft that had to prove its necessity not in training grounds, but in real combat conditions. Carrier squadrons flew from aircraft carriers patrolling the waters off the Korean peninsula, and their main task was to prevent the sudden appearance of enemy submarines. Crews patrolled the sea for hours, relying on radar, magnetic sensors, and electronic systems. Sometimes sorties were calm, and sometimes they had to operate in conditions of poor visibility over the gray ocean, where even experienced pilots lost their sense of the horizon. The Guardian helped keep communications under control and ensured confidence that the underwater enemy would not approach UN forces unnoticed. However, behind the execution of the mission lay a downside. Pilots complained about difficult handling. The machine was cumbersome, required great concentration, and did not forgive many mistakes. An aircraft overloaded with equipment or armament responded to commands with a delay, and in low-speed maneuvers, it seemed sluggish. This was especially felt during takeoffs and landings on the deck of smaller aircraft carriers, where any inaccuracy could lead to a catastrophe. The Guardian was impressive in size and capabilities, but behind this grandeur lay a character that made it one of the most difficult aircraft of its time. The main problem lay in the overloaded design. The fuselage had to accommodate massive radars, workstations for several operators, and the ammunition for the strike version. All of this increased the weight to such an extent that even the powerful 2,400 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine seemed insufficient. The aircraft flew, but always at the limit of its capabilities. Pilots noted that controlling the Guardian required constant struggle. At low speeds, it behaved particularly capriciously. The rudder deflection had to be held with effort, and during landing or a low-altitude approach, any inaccuracy could result in a dangerous bank. The enormous wingspan also added to the difficulties. On the decks of small aircraft carriers, it was cramped and inconvenient. These features directly affected the statistics. The Guardian earned a reputation as an aircraft with a high accident rate. Many accidents occurred not due to an external enemy, but because pilots and technology fought each other. For young pilots, it became a real test, requiring not only skills, but also iron nerves. The Navy did not intend to abandon the Guardian immediately, and sought to bring its capabilities to the maximum possible level. Thus, a new modification, the AF-3S, came into being. It incorporated a magnetometer, an instrument that detected even the slightest distortions in the Earth's magnetic field caused by the movement of a submarine's massive hull. Now, the crew could find a target even when radar proved useless, for example, in adverse weather conditions or during active countermeasures. This innovation made the search version of the aircraft significantly more accurate. The AF-3S, paired with the strike version, created a more reliable hunting system, and engineers hoped that this modernization would help change the Guardian's reputation. In practical application, the magnetometer indeed expanded the crew's capabilities and allowed them to do what had previously seemed almost impossible. But even with such an enhancement, the aircraft remained too cumbersome, difficult to handle, and required constant effort from the pilots. While the Guardian struggled with its own shortcomings, aviation technology was rapidly developing. Jet engines were becoming the norm, new onboard systems took up less space, and allowed functions to be combined into a single aircraft. The hunter-killer concept was increasingly giving way to the idea of a universal machine. When the Grumman S-2 Tracker appeared on aircraft carrier decks, it became clear that a new era of anti-submarine aviation had begun. This aircraft was the world's first carrier-based anti-submarine complex that combined two roles: searching for and destroying targets. It was no longer necessary to launch a pair of aircraft, dividing responsibilities between them. Now, a single crew could independently detect a submarine and strike it. The Tracker was more compact and easier to operate than the massive Guardian. Its design was immediately conceived for new tasks, without attempts to adapt old solutions to change requirements. It had two engines, which provided better reliability and maneuverability, and modern systems were integrated internally without overloading the structure. Where the Guardian required effort and compromises, the Tracker offered efficiency and simplicity. It was precisely because of this that the S-2 became a long-lived aircraft. It served for decades, was used not only in the USA but also by Allied fleets, was modernized, and remained in demand even when jet aviation had firmly occupied the skies. The Guardian, on the other hand, remained a temporary solution, born in a transitional period. Its mission was to pave the way for the future, to show the possibilities and shortcomings of the hunter-killer concept, and to prepare the ground for a truly universal aircraft. By the mid-1950s, the Guardian's fate was sealed. In operational squadrons, it was gradually replaced by the more modern Grumman S-2 Tracker, and the heavy single-engine giant could no longer compete with the new machine that combined the functions of hunter and striker. On August 31, 1955, the last Guardians were officially retired from combat units of the fleet. However, the aircraft's story did not end there. Several naval aviation squadrons continued to use it in reserve, where it served for a couple more years as a training and auxiliary aircraft. Reserve pilots trained on it. Engineers practiced methods for operating new electronics, and the aircraft themselves were used to practice tactics for interaction in anti-submarine missions. Gradually, there were fewer of them. The new generation displaced the transitional solution, and by 1957, even in reserve, the Guardian no longer appeared in the sky. Its place was taken by modern machines that proved the fleet had made the right choice. After leaving combat units and reserves, the Guardian did not disappear without a trace. Several aircraft were retained for test units, where they were used as flying laboratories. At the Naval Air Station Quonset Point, one such machine with tail number 1123100 served in VX-1 Squadron. Here, engineers tested new detection and electronic warfare systems, practiced anti-submarine mission tactics, and sought solutions that would later be implemented in more modern aircraft. Once its role as a testbed was complete, some Guardians found an unexpected second life in civil aviation. They were converted into firefighting tankers or used as demonstration aircraft at air shows. Their powerful silhouette, huge wings, and unique history made them attractive to the public. People who had never heard of anti-submarine operations watched with interest as a once-secret military machine performed peaceful tasks. Over time, the surviving aircraft began to end up in museums. There, the Guardian finally transformed into an exhibit, a symbol of an era when engineers and military personnel sought new ways to combat the underwater threat. In museum hangars, its history is frozen in metal from its first flights and difficult combat missions to its peaceful existence under the gaze of visitors. Thus, the combat giant became part of cultural memory, ceasing to be an instrument of war and turning into a reminder that even the most difficult and controversial project can play an important role in aviation development. The Guardian entered history as the first carrier-based aircraft specifically designed for anti-submarine warfare. Before it, carrier aviation performed many tasks, from striking ships to reconnaissance, but never before had there been a machine designed solely for hunting submarines. It is for this reason that the Guardian earned its place in the annals of naval aviation, but along with it, it also became a symbol of contradictions. On one hand, it was a giant that commanded respect with its size and armament, a true pioneer of a new doctrine. On the other hand, it turned out to be excessively heavy, overloaded, and difficult to control. Its crews faced difficulties that sometimes made serving on it a mission no less challenging than the mission itself. Its high accident rate and difficult reputation among pilots forever cemented its image as an aircraft with a difficult character. The Guardian had a short career and yielded to more advanced machines. But it was in its shortcomings that the lessons were born, allowing engineers to create the Grumman S-2 Tracker, a versatile and reliable aircraft that became the backbone of anti-submarine aviation for decades. This was the Guardian's role. It was a transitional link where mistakes coexisted with breakthroughs, and each weakness pointed the way to future achievements. Thus, reality made it a controversial figure, but legend made it indispensable. The Guardian remained a reminder of a time when aviation was searching for new forms, and bold experiments paved the way for real victories.